All right, I do quickly want to transition to basketball because, look, the NFL draft is a monster. It was incredible. I could talk about it for 45 minutes. But one, I got Patrick Patterson coming up soon, and you don't keep Patrick Patterson waiting in the green room of the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast. You get him ready to go. But two, there's also some really, really, really interesting college basketball stuff that came out from this weekend. And obviously, look, the big one is Danny Manning being fired from Wake Forest. And to kind of keep it as simple as I possibly can, this was both very surprising and not surprising at all. And from the not surprising camp, I think that's where we need to start, is that, I hate to be blunt, the guy just was not good at his job. Overall, 6 seasons, 78-111, 30-80 in the ACC. So we're talking about significantly below 500 in the ACC. He wasn't very good. He made one NCAA tournament. Even in that year that he made the NCAA tournament, Wake Forest went 19-14, and they played in the first four, lost in the first four, and every year other than that, get this, they finished 12th or worse in the ACC. That's a 15-team league, so it means that outside of 1 year where they made the NCAA tournament, which, by the way, they finished 10th in the ACC that year, outside of that 1 year, they finish in the bottom four every other year. And so I'm not generally the guy, you got to fire this guy, and you got to do this, and you got to do that. But, he kind of deserved to be fired. And in defense of Wake Forest, Danny Manning's been on a life raft for a while now. First of all, he got an insane extension after that first and only NCAA tournament bid. He was given an extension through 2024, and so I think he already got a life preserver last year because the AD who gave him the extension quit right before the offseason when he would have had to fire Danny Manning. The new AD comes in. The new AD doesn't have time to fire Danny Manning and do a coaching search. And so I already think that he got a life preserver last year. Then he got a life preserver this year. Why did he get a life preserver this year? Well, because the world's in a global pandemic. And as I told you, I think I was pretty much the first one to say this. I said, I think the coaching carousel is going to go to a screeching halt this offseason because I just don't think you can fire coaches in this climate. Two very obvious reasons why. One, if you're going to fire a coach, that means you got to hire a new coach. And you know what you got to do to hire a new coach? You got to go do interviews. And you know when it's really hard to do interviews? It's really hard to do interviews when you can't travel, when you can't cross state lines, when you can't leave your area. And so I just felt like any school that was going to fire a coach had to have the next guy lined up. Okay? So that was one. And then the second part, which we're going to get into because I think this is a big element of the Danny Manning firing, is you got to pay a buyout. Whenever you fire a coach, you got to pay a buyout. And there were some pretty big buyouts out there. Shaka Smart was owed a massive amount of money. Danny Manning was owed a massive amount of money. And it's really hard during a pandemic when everybody is struggling financially. And again, this isn't a political podcast. I'm not saying to feel bad for millionaires. But what I am saying is even the wealthiest of the wealthy have seen their financial net worth take a tumble over these last couple months, right? Even if you're filthy rich, your company's had to lay people off, your company's not making any money, your stock portfolio is down, even the wealthiest of the wealthy are struggling during these times. And so I thought that it would mean that nobody gets fired. Well, Danny Manning gets fired, and he is owed an absurd $15 million buyout. And so to me, this is the key element of this firing. Why did it happen now? Why in the middle of a pandemic was Wake Forest willing to fire Danny Manning, who is owed a $15 or so million buyout? The AD says it may be less, but the point is it's going to be a lot of money to not coach this program going forward. And I think the answer is very simply this. I think they know who they want their coach to be, and I think I have it down to two guys, and I really don't think one of those guys is a candidate. So first of all, let's just talk about who aren't the candidates, right? I keep seeing, it's this massive pool of candidates. Steve Forbes at ETSU, he's going to get that job. I don't see it. Pat Kelsey at Winthrop is going to get that job. Former assistant coach at Wake Forest. I don't see it. I see two guys, and I see two guys only, and I see only one that I think is really going to get it. The first guy who I don't think is going to get it, but I think is worth at least a discussion, is your boy John Beilein. And on paper, John Beilein is obviously, goes without saying, the best candidate available right now, right? He's been to multiple Final Fours. He has rebuilt West Virginia, Michigan, Richmond. He is maybe the best X's and O's coach in college basketball. It is a no-brainer. And so for Wake Forest to make this move now with John Beilein in mind, here is why I think it makes sense. It's really the only reason. This is the only moment in time where Wake Forest will be the best option for John Beilein, right? Because think about it. If the coaching carousel had gone off without a hitch, I believe that Texas would have fired Shaka Smart. I'm almost certain they would have been. You know how I know that? Because, oh, by the way, they waited 2 weeks until after the season to fire Shaka Smart. And so what that said to me was they knocked down every door. They kicked every tire to see if they could definitively get somebody better than Shaka Smart. They didn't think they could. They didn't want to pay a $10 million buy. So if Danny Manning had been fired after the season, Wake Forest would not have been the best job. If they wait until next season, Wake Forest will not be the best job because it's either going to be Texas or somewhere else that opens up. And so right now, this moment in time, in the middle of a pandemic, when everybody else is afraid to fire a coach, this is the best time to actually hire a coach who is sitting out. And so could I see the scenario where Wake Forest kind of on the DL, kind of went to their boosters and said, look, I'm not saying we should fire Danny Manning, but if we can get John Beilein, would you be willing to give us the money to get out of this contract? And I could see a scenario where these boosters said, yeah, for John Beilein, absolutely. I don't care if I got to give up half of my net worth. I don't care if half of my net worth has already disappeared in the last 2 months. To get John Beilein for my alma mater, I will give you the money to get rid of Danny Manning. And so I could see the scenario where behind the scenes, Wake went to John Beilein and said, hey, you think we can make this happen? Or John Beilein's agent maybe even said, hey, look, this guy doesn't want to do TV for a year. This guy has been a head coach at every level since the 1970s. He does not want to sit on the sidelines for another 9 months. Let's get this done. We'll take less money. We'll come to Wake Forest because you guys are our only option right now. So yes, I could see that scenario. I could see the scenario where quietly behind the scenes, the decision was made, we're going to go get John Beilein, and the boosters would support paying Danny Manning's buyout to get John Beilein. I don't think that's the scenario, though. And here is who I do think will be the next Wake Forest head coach. And this is why you come to AT, right? Because I tell you the story behind the story. And so here is who I think the next head coach will be and the story behind this story. I believe the next head coach will be Wes Miller, who is the head coach at UNC Greensboro. And I already know what you think. AT, I've never even heard of that guy. How are they going to pass on John Beilein? Or how are they not even going to make a run for John Beilein to get some guy that I've never heard of from UNC Greensboro? Well, it's very simple. Let me explain. First of all, Wes Miller is actually a very good coach. He's been at UNC Greensboro for 9 years. He's only 37 years old, which is insane. He's been at UNC Greensboro for 9 years. The last 4 years, they've won 23 or more games. They made the NCAA tournament in 2018. In 2019, they were the first team left out of the field. They went 28-6 during the regular season, should have gotten an at-large bid, didn't, and were left out of the field. So one, he's a really good coach. He's obviously from the area. He played basketball at North Carolina, but that's not why he's going to be the head coach. This is the story behind the story. Do you know who Wes Miller's dad is? Because this is the important part of this story. Wes Miller's dad is Kenneth Miller. Do you know who Kenneth Miller is? Kenneth Miller is one of the biggest boosters at Wake Forest. He is so big that his name is on the practice facility for the Wake Forest basketball team. His name is on the basketball practice facility for the Wake Forest basketball team. I'm sorry, but if you're a really good head coach and your dad's name is on your dad donates so much money to the school that his name is on the practice facility for the Wake Forest basketball team, you're getting that job if your dad wants you to get that job. And here is why. This is what I believe has happened. This hasn't been I haven't made a million phone calls on this. This is just me putting two and two together. I think that Wake Forest obviously wanted to get rid of Danny Manning. I don't think there's any debate about that, right? But what I do think is they ran into a situation where they were having trouble raising money to make it happen. Hard to raise money during a pandemic, right? We all get that. I would guess, this is speculation on my part, but I think it's pretty informed speculation based on just common sense and what people that I've talked to. I would guess that Kenneth Miller one of the most prominent boosters at Wake Forest, went to the AD and said, listen, you want to get rid of Danny Manning? I'm one of your biggest boosters. I will give you that buyout money, but I want to place the next head coach. And that sounds crazy, but it's not preposterous. Don't forget, John Curry was at Tennessee. Why did John Curry get fired at Tennessee? It's because Jimmy Haslam went to John Curry and said, I want Greg Schiano to be the next head coach. We're going to make it happen. And John Curry, for lack of a better term, excuse my language, bent over and said, okay, cool, hook 'em, no problem. Well, guess what? Tennessee fan base revolted. John Curry gets fired. He ends up at Wake Forest. So it's not as though he doesn't have a history of kowtowing to a major booster. And I think Wake Forest is such a unique situation because, one, they owed this insane amount of money. And Wake Forest isn't Texas. It's not Ohio State. It's not Penn State. It's not Wisconsin. It's not one of these schools that has hundreds of thousands of living alumni all across the United States and have this crazy endowment. Wake Forest is the smallest private school, is the smallest school in the Power 5 in terms of enrollment. It's tiny. It has like 7,000 undergrads. Ohio State has like 45,000. Arizona State has like 45,000. So there aren't that many people at Wake Forest that can actually pony up the money to make it happen. Kenneth Miller apparently, and I don't know his personal finances, I'm not his accountant, is one of those guys that can make it happen. And so I think Kenneth Miller, I keep calling him Kenneth Murray, that's the guy from Oklahoma. Kenneth Miller, behind the scenes, I think he went and said, look, I'll get rid of Danny Manning, but I'll scratch your back, but you got to scratch mine. And take it a step further. The timing, again, this is the big thing that I've tried to get to you through this segment. The timing makes perfect sense because think about it from Kenneth Miller's perspective. He knows the school wants to get rid of Danny Manning. He knows the school can't get the money probably anywhere else because it's a small school with a small alumni base. They don't have a ton of boosters. Oh, by the way, if you wait until next fall, there is the possibility, or if you wait until after next season, there's the possibility that Danny Manning does really well. Can't fire him then. There's a possibility that his son struggles. Can't hire your son when your son struggles. And so I don't want to discredit Wes Miller. I don't want to say that he's not a qualified candidate because that he is. But what I would also say is that sometimes you have to look at the story behind the story. And the story behind the story is one of the most powerful guys at the university happens to be his father. His father has paid a ton of money to the basketball program. We know that. It's public. It's on a building. And I would assume behind the scenes, the dad went to the AD and said, listen, I'll help you get rid of Danny Manning, but you got to scratch my back and get my son in. I think Wes Miller is going to be the next head coach. I don't think anybody else is even really a candidate, and I think that's how it happened, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's named the head coach in the next couple days.